But Shawn, let's talk about some of the other teams as well, because in that range where they go, you have other teammate stuff. You also have Debo and Ayuk going in that same spot, both of them. And you have DJ Moore still going there. And I alluded to this earlier, but that's a really interesting one. I kind of want to jump over to the Bears if that's okay with you. We have DJ Moore still going at the 2-3 turn, but Keenan Allen, he's going later, but clearly good enough to influence the way that we consider DJ Moore since that trade has been made. And I don't think Moore has fallen enough as a result. And when I was talking to you a little bit about this before we started recording, one of the points you made is that we're probably too confident in Caleb Williams. I actually saw a Twitter poll that was asking sort of the dynasty value of whether you would take Caleb Williams or CJ Stroud. And I was like, are you kidding? Like, I was just, CJ Stroud's a hit already. Like, we know that. And he was the second overall QB. You can say that Caleb Williams is a better prospect because he was like a longer term like thing in college and has been the clear 101 for years and all of that. But he has to do a lot to be what CJ Stroud already is going to be. And one of the other notes that you made when you were describing the plays that CJ Stroud made in his rookie year that just stood out to me is like he made enough of those plays to be very confident that he's going to be good, but also as you worry about sophomore slumps with a lot of players. I'm not worried about defenses are going to adjust, but I'm also like, I mean, his floor was already so high as a rookie. Like, what are they going to do next? What is Bobby Slowick and CJ Stroud going to come up with next? They could just take the league by storm in year two in a way that, Patrick Mahomes did in his second season or those types of things. You talked about the 5,050. So anyway, I don't think that's even really a comparison. But to talk about what we can get out of Caleb Williams, we do think he's a really strong prospect, and we do expect him to be very, very good. But to immediately assume that he does what CJ Stroud did last season is a difficult call. I talked a little bit about Stroud playing in Houston and the divisional stuff and all of that, and I think that's interesting in this conversation as well because Caleb Williams is playing in the NFC North. He's going to be playing outdoor games in Chicago in the late part of the season. He's going to be playing outdoor games at Lambeau probably. You got domes in the other two cities in that division, but the potential for like a home at Green Bay, home, fantasy playoff stretch where the Bears are playing 3 windy games or something like that. It's not out of the question. And then you talk about those receivers where their prices are still very high. DJ Moore is going in that range. That was something that stood out to me, Shawn, as I got into my early drafts and was at the 2-3 turn. How do I decide between Debo and Ayuk? How do I decide between Diggs and Nico? And how do I decide between DJ Moore here and Keenan Allen later? I am in on DJ Moore this year. I know I was out on him a little bit last year, and he was so good with Fields that I am in on him. I was concerned about the volume in the offense and the way that Fields plays, but I don't think I'm in on him at that price. And I took him a couple of times in that range, but I don't love it. I like Keenan Allen 2 rounds later a lot more. And I think there's an argument that Keenan Allen should just go higher than DJ Moore. He's a better target earner in terms of, the per route run stuff. DJ Moore clearly more efficient, and you're talking about half PPR over an Underdog. You think you have to consider that, I think, here where you want the efficiency spikes in the lower half PPR format as opposed to a full PPR format. You might be a little bit more into Keenan. But this is a really interesting passing game as well since the trade of Keenan Allen. Where do you stand on DJ Moore still sitting at an ADP right around the 2-3 turn and Keenan Allen, well into round 4, sometimes falling to the end of round 4?
One of the notes that I made, or assertions that I made when Pat and I were talking, and I've got a pretty low ranking on Devontae Adams, and I have sort of a neutral ranking on Travis Kelce, but that's within the context of being higher on the other tight ends. And so it's negative from the perspective of structurally within the group, is that I don't think that I need to have those 2 guys because you have the risk of a collapse season. And that's one of the issues that you have with the older players. It's not necessarily a gradual decline. Something that Blair has showed in his age arcs and trajectories pieces very well is that, when it falls off the table, that's your issue. And you don't need to have those shares, I don't think, for Adams and Kelce. So I want to put that out there at the beginning of this to say that I do think that there is risk with Keenan Allen, age related, that you want to be aware of. And so when you're talking about a guy who's at a peak age versus someone who is definitely not, that is a dynamic that comes into play. And I think that dynamic is maybe swamping some other things that are relevant here. One of the things that we noted in our previous group of episodes, looking at the receivers, just again, kind of referencing Blair and how, we talk about all these different stats and what do they mean and what's most useful. And you want to understand the profiles for these players. I'm not in any way knocking going into the details at all. The details are very relevant and can give you a lot of information. But you also don't want to ignore just the big picture and maybe the most relevant stat, which is the fantasy scoring. And I mean, Keenan Allen crushed DJ Moore last season on a per game basis. And
I don't think people think that. I mean, I don't think people realize that. DJ Moore had the one massive game as well, right? And I think that kind of paints a different picture in people's minds about his season. But he had a lot of low games, a lot of single-digit games. And so I don't think people recognize what you just noted, that Keenan Allen outscored him by quite a bit.
And you can go back to the middle of 2022. And so, I mean, it's not just like picking out a spot where, okay, he started scoring well, and we're going to go from that. When he got back healthy and he started playing again in the middle of 2022, week 11, from that point to the end of the 2023 season, in half PPR, only 3 players have outscored Keenan Allen, and those players are CeeDee Lamb, Tyreek Hill, and Justin Jefferson. Right? And again, that same big gap exists between Allen and DJ Moore. Now, if you were going to have the same quarterback and the same offensive coordinator that DJ Moore played with last year, I would say that a veteran receiver changing teams to jump into this situation is going to be at a pretty significant disadvantage. But that's not what we have, right? We're going to have a new QB and we're going to have a new offense. And so, I mean, where does DJ Moore have the edge other than simply not having that age-related risk, which, again, does matter?
I don't think he has an edge. I think he has an edge in that his ADP was anchored higher prior to Keenan Allen getting traded, and then it hasn't adjusted. We started this show with the theme of broken ADPs, and I mean, I think Keenan Allen relative to DJ Moore is the biggest one for me so far, as I've started to do some of my drafts where I don't understand. I don't think there's a justification. You just noted the scoring difference. That's in addition to DJ Moore. That's considering DJ Moore having that monster game was the point that I was trying to drive home, which was against Washington. And we learned that Washington's cornerbacks were horrible. They were getting smashed by everyone. And that's maybe not super relevant, but he has 230 yards and 3 touchdowns and a couple long, big plays against what ends up being an elite matchup for outside wide receivers and players like him and the plays that he made in that game. And he's probably the one that took advantage of it the most and certainly influenced those, opponent adjustment numbers by having that monster game against them. But the rest of the year, it was clear that you could pick on Washington's outside cornerbacks for fantasy purposes. You wanted to know who the outside receivers going up against Washington were. That's not to discount it. And to your point, though, he's not in that situation with that quarterback again. It's reminiscent of the Diggs and Nico Collins situation, except Nico Collins is still with the guy that he just posted a 3+ yards per out run with. And yet Diggs is going right next to Nico. So I think, this efficiency player that has a little bit more target earning concern, although Nico's target earning was stronger on a per route basis than TJ Moore's last year, more consistent. That guy going alongside Diggs, that's so Nico and DJ Moore are that mold. Nico going alongside Diggs, you can kind of understand. You can kind of make a case for either. I leaned a little bit towards Diggs when we talked about the Texans, but I can definitely see leaning towards Nico. And I worry about that from an age-related point, as you noted when you were talking about the Keenan Allen point as well. When you go look at the Bears and you look at the same dynamic and you look at what you said, that it's not what Nico gets, where he gets the same quarterback and situation that he was just successful in. Both of them are going to be working with a whole new system and new quarterback. It doesn't make any sense to me, really. You're expecting the high efficiency player. I when we talked again also about the Texans, I felt it was maybe 60-40 that Diggs would be the target leader and 40% towards Nico, and probably not 100% of the outcomes are just those two, because there's ways that Tank Dell could lead in targets as well. But between those two, I kind of had it a 60-40. Diggs would lead, and still plenty of opportunity for Nico Collins to be the target leader. I think I'd put a bigger gap on this one. I think I would. I mean, assuming Keenan Allen can stay healthy, he's an injury risk. He's had hamstring injuries later. I don't necessarily expect later in his career. I don't necessarily expect him as he's older to age gracefully, but assuming that he's out there as much as DJ Moore is, I think I would put it more like 65-35 or closer to 70-30 or something, because Keenan Allen has always been a target earner. Now, I would also go the opposite way and say that I feel much more confident that DJ Moore is going to be the more efficient player because of his yak ability, because of probably a higher ADOT. Keenan Allen's not going to do a ton with the ball in his hands. He's a route runner. He's a technician. He's going to earn volume, and he's going to catch the ball reliably, but he's not necessarily going to break long touchdowns like DJ Moore can. And so, yes, they're different profiles, but I don't understand the gap, and I don't understand how you can justify the gap other than saying that you're just completely out on Keenan Allen from an age and health-related standpoint. And I think that's what the market is saying. But I think you should also be lower on DJ Moore then, because you still have to acknowledge that there's risk, right? There is a concern. And you also have to acknowledge that there's a concern and risk with the quarterback change for DJ Moore and a rookie quarterback who maybe just doesn't play up to the level that everyone is confident he will play up to. Maybe he's not CJ Stroud.
And I think he's going to be good. I mean, I want that out there. I've been drafting him. I'm very excited for what he's going to bring. And yet, I mean, you think about how confident people were about Bryce Young last year. And I mentioned, getting talked out of having CJ Stroud, gapped to the other two QBs. And part of that was just the enthusiasm for Bryce Young. And not only was he not good, but I mean, Ben, he was absolutely awful. And we know from the QB hit rates that risk exists. Now, again, I mean, I think Caleb Williams is going to be very good.
We both do, but quarterback prospecting is an inexact science. That's just the reality.
And I think that we can, get kind of caught up too in this idea that Keenan Allen is a little bit of a lower ceiling play. And yet, I mean, the floor there is so impressive with his target earning ability, which has just been like clockwork for his entire career. And even something like touchdowns. I mean, Ben, he's more or less locked in between 6 and 8 touchdowns. And you're like, well, I prefer to have, 11. But it's like, you get 6 to 8 touchdowns with the rest of that profile. I mean, that's fantastic. And there are opportunities for, I mean, if Caleb Williams is good, which is what people are banking on, and DJ Moore has a good season, then, I mean, how are you going to cover Keenan Allen? We know that even with how good Justin Herbert is, there have been aspects of the Chargers offense that have been dysfunctional the last handful of seasons. And I mean, if you're expecting the Bears to break out and Williams to be like CJ Stroud, then I think that justifies where DJ Moore is going, but Keenan Allen should be going much, much earlier, be going about in the same range. So we're looking at broken ADPs. You're talking about DJ Moore at wide receiver 15, Keenan Allen at wide receiver 27. I had them next to each other at the 3-4 turn coming into today as I was doing some more preparation for the show. I actually moved Keenan Allen like 3 or 4 spots ahead. And again, that goes back to the fact that just it's safer, it's more established, the scoring is there, they're going to be in the same environment. It's on DJ Moore to prove that he can outdraw Allen in terms of targets when both of those guys are out there in a functional offense.
It really doesn't make sense. I love DJ Moore, and I was wrong about how good he could be last year because he was great. I wouldn't say I was totally wrong because, again, he did have a lot of low games, but the spike games were huge for best ball. But yeah, we talked about the points per game scoring, not really as high as I think people think when they think about how good DJ Moore was last year. But I mean, I guess the way I would say it is I feel actually fairly confident that in August, Keenan Allen's going to have a higher ADP than DJ Moore, or it's going to be close. I mean, you mentioned ranking him higher. I would rank Keenan Allen higher too. I really do think this is an anchoring effect with the early drafts where people just haven't wanted to drop more enough yet. But I don't see how when you get more and more drafters in and more, I mean, it's not always just casuals. Like, people are going to come in and be like, Keenan Allen's good. Like, why are we just ignoring that Keenan Allen exists alongside DJ Moore here and drafting DJ Moore this high and drafting Keenan Allen this low? I mean, that doesn't make any sense.
And we had a similar dynamic last year, and I'm not saying it's going to play out the same way, but Keenan Allen was undervalued, and people did eventually.
They agree. Yeah.
And
then he had a season where he had his highest yards per route run since 2018. I mean, that's the part that I don't get is last year people got excited about Keenan Allen, and then he smashed. He was incredible last year. He had a great year. But now we're like, well, can't be it on Keenan Allen again. Like, it just doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But Shawn, he's not the only receiver going in that range that feels undervalued. You and I talked about a couple there. Part of the reason I'm a little bit concerned about Tank Dell is I'm looking at the Underdog ADP right now. Keenan Allen is the next receiver right behind him. The next three behind that are T. Higgins, Rome Odunze, and Zay Flowers. When we talk about more broken ADPs, one of the things that I have felt as I've done some of these drafts is I've had a hard time in the second round, which seems weird. You should have a lot of guys that you want to take in the second round. And when I was talking to you about some of those issues, and we just talked about some of them where there's some teammate stuff going on. You still have DJ Moore going that high. One of the things you said was like, there's not like who goes there. And that's a great question. Like, who moves up into those spots? We talked about some names that could move up into those spots that I think belong higher. Chris Olave is one. He's going behind DJ Moore. He's going behind both Nico Collins and Stephon Diggs. And it just has a clearer path to being the clear number one. And yes, he's been inefficient with Derek Carr, but I think there's a possibility that can bounce back in a big way. He's looked really good for his first
You think
seasons.
about weighted targets per route and the potential breakout factor there. Nothing is gone from Olave's profile that would lead you to believe that a third year. I mean, I think sometimes if the guy actually has a really good rookie season, then you start to anchor to that as opposed to, and again, when the breakout happens, I mean, the breakout can happen right away, but you can still have this secondary breakout that takes them to the next level and justifies a draft pick at the 1-2 turn as opposed to the 2-3 turn. Yeah. We shouldn't ignore the possibility for that, especially as, I mean, I do think there are some, minor reasons to be confident that the Saints offense will evolve in a positive direction.
Yeah. They new OC this year, right? They finally got rid of Pete Carmichael and are making some adjustments on the coaching staff.
Yeah, they're gonna be better. And Olave is gonna be healthier. I mean, I think that this season we should be just as confident about the middle of the second round price as we were a year ago. You shouldn't be pushed off of him because last season was mildly disappointing.
Right. And then you have like Malik Neighbors behind him, Jalen Waddle. Some interesting third round receivers for sure. But the thing I was kind of telling you is I have this concern in the second round, and then suddenly I get in the third, the fourth, the fifth, and it's like, I want to take everyone. I want to take the tight ends, who we could talk a lot about, Shawn, as broken ADPs. You just mentioned being much higher on all of the tight ends, and certainly relative to the other young tight ends near the top. Even though you have Kelsey ranked relatively close to his ADP, that you would even be more confident in some of the young tight ends. But I mean, we talked about this down the stretch last season, that last year was a breakout year for young tight ends, obviously. And we have Sam Laporta going as tight end 1, with Trey McBride going as tight end 3. You and I have talked about McBride as potentially the tight end 1 basically the whole offseason. You have Kincaid going as tight end 5, who no longer has Stephon Diggs in Buffalo. You have Kyle Pitts has moved up, tight end 6, but gets Kirk Cousins, right? And then interspersed in there are the older ones, the Travis Kelce, Mark Andrews, and George Kittle. And there's still some intriguing names beyond that. But then you do run into sort of a wall at tight end a little later, and you feel like you want to be getting tight ends in those ranges because none of them are super expensive. Sam Laporta's going as tight end 1, but at Underdog, where it's not tight end premium, he's going in the third round. And then Kelsey's the tight end 2 in the fourth round. McBride's actually early 5th round with his ADP at tight end 3. So you're not really having the big opportunity cost. The top tight ends in the past couple of years have gone much higher than this. Obviously, Kelsey, a first-round pick for several seasons. That's not the case anymore. But even tight end 2, Mark Andrews typically like a 3rd-round pick. We're not seeing as much of that push-up, yet tight end doesn't feel as deep. And so that really feels like a tight end target area. At the same time, the wide receivers are the ones, I was just talking about the ones right behind Tank Dell. Right ahead of Tank Dell, you have Cooper Kupp. You have Rashee Rice falling like a rock, and obviously should. We don't know what the deal is there. Obviously a scary situation. I gave a lot of positive analysis about his profile prior to that instance, the car wreck and the whole legal situation that he is now in. On an earlier stealing bananas this offseason, he's now fallen a ton. I'm still drafting him, though. I mean, I'm not confident that I know what's going to happen there, but I'm willing to take him in the 4th round I think one of the possible outcomes here is like a very minor suspension. I'm not totally confident in any of this. Cooper Kupp right behind Rashee Rice is like, I've talked a little bit, I think, on the show, Sean, about not being completely sold that Puka Nacua has completely taken over from Cooper Kupp. And so one of the things there is, okay, well, Cooper Kupp's now a 4th-round pick. If I believe that, then I have to be willing to take Kupp in that range. But behind Tank Dell, we had Keenan Allen. We talked about T. Higgins, Odunze, Zay Flowers. You mentioned to me, big note for the Stealing Signals listeners, that Rome Odunze is back to your wide receiver 3. Just a little UW love there.
That is massively smirking as he wears his Washington Huskies shirt for the video.
Yeah, anyone who's watching on YouTube can see my Washington Huskies shirt, my Washington Huskies helmet in the background. And it doesn't even have anything really to do with Odunze other than maybe some minor concerns about Xavier Worthy that we were talking a little bit about before the show. But Odunze is an interesting player in that range, but I'm probably not even my favorite pick. I think his price is great. But like we just talked about Keenan Allen being a great price. T. Higgins, Sean, at 45, he's demanded a trade, but if he gets traded, his value would presumably go up. And at 45, you're getting a huge discount on where he was going into last year. Now, had a tough year last year, but if he's there with the Bengals again, it's hard to understand why he would go this much lower than last year, other than the fact that he's coming off a down season. And then Zay Flowers is the 4th of those names I mentioned, and he's one that you've mentioned to me maybe being the most mispriced player in this range.
Yeah, so I'm really excited to get into the tight ends for anybody who's kind of listening to this via the shorts. That'll probably be our 3rd of sort of the 3 episodes from this larger show. But yeah, we get here to the middle of the 4th round. And so after Keenan Allen, those 3 wide receivers that you mentioned are T. Higgins, Rome Odunze, and Zay Flowers. And then in the 5th round, we get Pickens, Cooper, and Christian Kirk, followed by Jaden Reed. So I would have a couple of questions for you before we get too much deeper into the weeds. Do you see a tier break after Allen? Do you see a tier break at any point in this 4 or 5 range to where you see these guys very, very differently as we're looking at this sort of broken ADPs, overall theme?
I would say that I probably see a little bit of a tier break after Allen, because I do think Allen should go higher and has the potential to really be a big target earner and those things. And Kupp and Rashee Rice being sort of just right above him. I feel like those guys have the ability, all of them, including Allen, but maybe not so much Allen, but have the ability to essentially return like 1st-round value. I don't know that I feel the same about T. Higgins and Rome Odunze as a rookie. And so I would probably say a little bit of a break there. I would just order things differently after Zay Flowers. I wouldn't be as high on Pickens because I'm a little bit concerned about the quarterback play. I'm fine with him there. But I'm actually probably too high on Christian Kirk, but pretty excited about that. We talked about it, I think, on the show, how Gabe Davis being this legit vertical threat, I think is really, really positive for Christian Kirk in terms of the way that their passing offense will operate. And so he's one that I really like pulling the trigger on in the 5th round. When you get into this range, I would probably put him up around the Zay Flowers range. But then I would probably have the Pickens and Amari Cooper and Jaden Reed group a half step below, certainly, as well. And then you start to get a little further beyond that, Marquise Brown is still pretty interesting. But then you get Terry McLaurin, you get Calvin Ridley now in Tennessee, you get Brian Thomas, who I did not have a lot of nice things to say about when we did the rookie stuff. You get down a little further than that, and it gets thin quick. And, you go another round. There's a couple interesting names. I'm interested in Deontay Johnson in Carolina. I'm interested in taking Jackson Smith and Jigba again. But beyond those guys, you really start to get to where, you're definitely a couple tiers down from this 4-5 range. So what I've noticed in these early drafts for sure is this round 3, round 4, round 5 range. Last year, Sean, we were talking about taking dead zone running backs in that range. I want to be taking pass catchers every time. I've been okay taking a running back stab in the first or second round, and even a couple running back starts, because I want to take receivers or tight ends in 3, 4, 5, and probably 6, basically every time. And I have had a lot of starts that are like wide receiver times 4, because I started wide receiver, and then I got to the 3rd and 4th round, and I was like, yeah, I'm going to just take receivers again. And so I have, the traditional 0 RB where it's just all receivers in the first 4 rounds. I think by the end of 6, you want to be heavily exposed to the receiver position.
I like that. And that's where I am with it as well. I think that after Flowers goes, you have a big tier break to the next group. And I mean, Odunze for me is tricky, because I'm going to have some work out on him. I think that it's extremely encouraging that he was so good at all levels, and he's such a well-rounded prospect in terms of the vertical ability, the ability to break tackles. One of the things that jumps out consistently when you look at the SIS numbers for Washington is that there are some concerns about what Penix did. And that's one of the things that, you have said on the show as well, is that he has a big arm. He's willing to throw deep, but the accuracy is not there. SIS doesn't think the accuracy was there at all. And so that's going to hurt the numbers for someone like Odunze. At the same time, when you're talking about Higgins and you're talking about Flowers and what they have done, I don't want this to be something where we're just like, well, we liked Higgins last year and now he's cheaper, so, let's load up. But when you look at the trajectory there, one of the things that, you'll hear from time to time, or, you certainly used to hear, is it's easy to forget that there was a long stretch where Higgins and Chase were playing side by side, where Higgins was scoring at the same level, if not slightly higher. Now, there's no comparison between these two players in my mind. Jamar Chase, a legitimate top 5 pick. I think T. Higgins in round 4 does make sense. But when you look at some of the things that he has done, when you look at the collapse in yards per route last season, you think about how he wasn't healthy for a big chunk of it. Now, I mean, T. Higgins has never been a great catch guy. One of the things that you notice when you look at his numbers is that the on-target catch percentage the first couple of years is in this 85% range, which is certainly not good, but it's not catastrophic, and the drop numbers are not terrible. But those balloon too. The drops last year, 13%. The on-target catch percentage, 75%. His run after the catch, far worse than it had been the previous season. I don't think we can't ignore that, and that's one of the reasons why he is less expensive. But I also think that we've got a big enough sample with him that we can attribute a lot of those things to flukiness and injuries. And if you do that, I mean, again, are you going to be able to take T. Higgins away when the defense has to account for Jamar Chase? And so to be able to draft him in the second half of the 4th round feels like such a gift, that even if you are at least mildly concerned and you're worried that this could be a guy who peaked early and then fades a little bit and becomes, a little bit more just a guy, I think that you have to take that risk there. And then with Zay Flowers, you're talking about somebody who in PPR put up, more than 200 points as a rookie. I mean, those guys go on to big seasons. And you think about the playoff loss to the Chiefs, where, I mean, he's the guy who delivers excitement, delivers big playability, can get open for them. When the Chiefs were able to lock down everybody else, they don't have other receivers. So it's kind of this question of Mark Andrews versus Zay Flowers. One of the things that you noted to me is that the yards per route numbers are pretty similar, but there are some, at least vaguely disconcerting other peripherals for a Mark Andrews. And so if I'm looking at these two players and trying to decide how to attack it, For me, there are other tight ends that you can get maybe similar production and maybe more exciting upside from, who are also starting to get a little bit older. Whereas with Flowers, you're getting this potential against secondary breakout to where a guy goes from this, wonderful rookie season to being an absolute star. It's kind of crazy to me that in an environment where fantasy managers now know very clearly about the value of the second season, that we can get a price like this on a Zay Flowers. And even though it's sort of quarterback related, a 6th round price on Jordan Addison. Now you're going to have to get excruciatingly bad QB play from whoever is pulling the trigger from Minnesota for Addison to be a 6th round guy. I mean, you're not talking about guys who need to make the jump. You're talking about guys who have already made the jump at the NFL level and have these wildly discounted ADPs.
It's fascinating that some of the situations feel like we're, as a market, very focused on the situation and like too focused on the situation. Others, it feels like we're too focused on the player, and there's just not a lot of continuity, I guess, is what I'm trying to put together. But if we do zoom in on the situation for a couple of these players, I would just note that the Bengals lost Tyler Boyd this offseason. They didn't really add another receiver, and yes, T. Higgins, maybe there's concern that he'll hold out or something, but he's demanded a trade, and I think they're going to just play him. They have a window right now, and they're trying to they have no reason to trade him. They would be a lot thinner than they would want to be as a contender behind Jamar Chase if they did trade him. So he has to decide whether he's going to hold out or not or what have you. But they also have not found a tight end. They brought in Mike Gesicki this offseason, but every year they change their tight end because it's, last year it was Irv Smith, which didn't work, which we kind of all expected. Gesicki's kind of a vaguely interesting name there now, but there's no third weapon is the point I'm making. For the Vikings, you have a similar thing where, KJ Osborne is no longer in Minnesota. And so again, very clearly the number 2 is Jordan Addison. And so how bad do we think this situation is going to be? I don't necessarily understand that. TJ Hawkinson as well is there, and he's a good tight end, but coming back from a late season ACL, probably not going to be heavily in the target mix early in the year. So the market for some of these players like this, to me, the market's just not they're really overvaluing one thing, but not the other. For Higgins, they're really overvaluing the bad season last year, but not paying attention to the offseason and where the Bengals are going and what that's going to mean for 2024. For Addison, they're not valuing last season enough, and they're really looking at the quarterback play, and they're saying it's going to be so bad that we can't play him. But they're also, again, not looking at the team, the depth chart, and everything. He's clearly a huge part of this passing game alongside Jefferson. In both cases, these guys are the clear second target earner.
And the passing quality between probably half a season or a third of a season of Sam Darnold and then 2/3 of a season of JJ McCarthy is not going to be great. But in the third round, you're getting Michael Pittman, who is going to be in a low volume passing offense with a guy who probably still has a ton of work to do as any kind of a successful passer. You have DK Metcalf in the third round, having not been a great target earner in the second half of last season, in a 3-way battle for targets, and with either Geno Smith or Sam Howell pulling the trigger. Those guys are more established, but yet you look at what Jordan Addison did, the caliber of prospect he was, the second-year leap that we would expect, and it's just, to me, it's massively exploitable when you look at the quality of the situations there. You're probably not that different. You bring in the coaching for the Vikings, you bring in the dome. I would have Jordan Addison, not even taking into consideration ADP, would be very comfortable taking him in the same range as Michael Pittman or DK Metcalf. Now, I won't do that, obviously. There's no need to. But
why are we not projecting
broken ADP?
Yeah, why are we not projecting to 2024 at all? I mean, and I agree with you completely on Pittman and Metcalf. I think I've gotten through the third round in all my drafts. I selected neither of them. I haven't selected either of them one time in my 20 drafts that I'm doing. Pittman, we're not projecting to 2024 again. You just said it with the way that you're talking through it, but the quarterback change is massive. I mean, we talked about it last year, how Gardner Minshew coming in could be really huge for the Colts if that were to happen, and it ends up happening for a huge chunk of the season. And Pittman has a great year and he's good. But I mean, I'm not paying a 3rd round price for Anthony Richardson's number 1 wide receiver. It's just not, it's not going to happen. I will, in his defense,
is a lot better than people realize. I mean, it's not just Michael Pittman there.
But one thing I will say is that research I did on the RPO, number 1 receiver in RPO offenses, Pittman was probably the biggest beneficiary of the people that I didn't expect. The Colts ran a ton of RPOs. They were, I think, 2nd in the NFL in pass attempts off RPOs. Steichen coming over from the Eagles, who had done a lot of that. Even with Gardner Minshew, they were running these RPOs. And then I think that led to Michael Pittman consolidating some of the target share, which might carry over. You would kind of expect to carry over a little bit. So that's a little bit in defense of him, but I'm still, that's a lofty price for sure. And I agree with you on Metcalf. I mean, I'm much more willing to play Seattle through a JSN year 2 breakout later. And it's not like Tyler Lockett doesn't exist. He obviously still does. And he's very cheap. I mean, you could play into him much later as well. But yeah, there's definitely some questions for me at the wide receiver position, but some real interesting targets. It's harder in like the 2nd round. Like once Drake London goes off the board, I have a really hard time. Like, where do I want to go? And I've taken London at like the 1-2 turn when I've had the 112, because like if once Garrett Wilson's off the board and AJ Brown's off the board, like I kind of think he should go next. I think I've said this a couple places, but I think Marvin Harrison's going a little bit too high. Not that I don't want to be in on Marvin Harrison either, but just a little bit too high. Then so the 2nd round's kind of tricky, and then it's weird because you get into the 3rd, the 4th, the 5th, and you're like, well, there's a lot of names here that I do like.